The neon lights. Night City. For years, millions of people dreamed of getting into these shoes and rule the streets full of cyberthugs. Reality, on the other hand, hit us in the face on December 10th when we dived for the first time into Cyberpunk 2077. Game-breaking bugs, a level of immersion far from what you would expect from an RPG, and many other unfortunate decisions tarnished the image of a city that had become the science fiction apotheosis in the world of video games. CD Projekt Red signed hype checks he wouldn't be able to pay at the end. The disappointment was historic. And still, Night City became an idyllic place to walk through for those who managed to bite the bullet. CD Projekt Red's creative work had found a place in the hearts of many gamers. It is not surprising, therefore, how their eyes sparkled when they saw an animated adaptation of that very same world they learned to love. After all, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is a monument built from the golden bricks of a palace that fell under its own weight. But is all the glitter actually gold? Does this show really deserve the overwhelming reception it got? Or is there another way to see this? Well, my name is Carlos and this will be what nobody told you about Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Oh, and by the way, you do have YouTube subtitles ready to use when you need them. Because of course you'll need them. Well, anywhere is a good place to begin as any, so why not start from the music that most inspires Cyberpunk? What you're listening to right now is called Synthwave. Some of you will recognize it instantly, as it is directly inspired by the aesthetic sounds created by authors such as John Carpenter, Tangerine Dream or Vangelis, who influenced the 80s electronic music. And do you know what else emerged in the 80s? The cyberpunk genre. Synthwave is intrinsically connected to retrofuturism, as it is retrofuturism's very definition applied to music. A tribute to remembrance, an ode to the past, which saw in the future a place with neither limits nor taboos. Futures that, nowadays, we are unable to imagine as all we can see is staunchess ahead of us. And so, we close our eyes. We go back. It is impossible to separate cyberpunk from these synthetic rhythms, as they were created directly to embody it. To signify a world where flesh is replaced by metal, where the borders between reality and cyberspace merge, where your life ceases to be yours and transmutes into a product, a service. In a cold world where money is worth more than life, an inhuman synthetic soundtrack is perhaps the only apt answer. After all, that's what cyberpunk is all about, right? Is this cyberpunk that dark, neon-filled aesthetic? Is multiculturalism? The gigantic buildings? The perpetual night where everything fights to have its own light? What is cyberpunk? To define the moment cyberpunk was born is something extremely complicated to specify, as surely there is no single correct answer to its origins, as you will shortly understand. But I would say its first steps are in the pulp. Pulp culture, recognized by everyone and at the same time by no one at all nowadays. Most of us have known this narrative aesthetic through its references in modern shows.
I can be very, very persuasive.
Pulp literature was once one of the greatest creative hotbeds in North American history. The pulp consisted of small magazines and stories of questionable quality, although a very characteristic, attractive and representative peak. It is the version saving the distances of Japan's isekai, just 100 years before. Fortunately, the American mental compost turned out much better than the current garbage dump we call the isekai subgenre. On the one hand, making way for science fiction to develop freely, and on the other giving birth to hard-boiled literature as an opposing movement against detectives' adventures. In the late 19th century, British physician and writer Arthur Conan Doyle created the most famous detective of all time with the publication of A Study in Scarlet, Sherlock Holmes' first novel. The cultural impact of this man's work was so big it inspired a whole generation of writers who, 30 years later, would lead the golden age of detective fiction. Britain's Agatha Christie, Sayers, Alec Mann and Morse, also called the Queens of Crime, and many other authors helped settle the narrative foundations of the detective genre with their extensive work and numerous adaptations to the big screen. However, where we saw a Victorian society and a protagonist who solved the wealthy bourgeoisie's problems, at the other side of the ocean this seemed like a bad joke. And so, America's hard-boiled fiction put the detective we all know in an institutionally corrupt society. Rayce Williams, hard-boiled's maximum representative stereotype, stored in stories characterized by its extreme violence, gruesome murders, erotic content, and explicit sex. He put us in the boots of what many years later we would call an anti-hero. However, this kind of main lead still could not separate themselves from the classic detective. The protagonist may have been a repudiated officer with violence as his only tool, and his final scene might have smoking corpses riddled with the detective's gun, but he would always have a moral reason backing his actions. While the British spoke of the detective against crime in a structured society, Pulp pitted the detective against an entire society adapted to crime. It would still take 15 more years to see the true paradigm shift, the real literary opposition to the pompous Scotland Yard, the evolutionary end of the hard-boiled. The day the noir fiction was born, justice died to then become a settling of scores. Also known as Roman Noir, noir fiction portrayed a dark, filthy and crime-ridden city where good and evil were not defined or just unimportant.
The police have got to have a victim, somebody they can pin those 3 murders on.
3, but it is only 2 because Thursby certainly killed your partner.
All right, only 2 then. What difference does it make?
The main characters became ordinary people, but with mental imbalances that led them to a path of self-destruction, violence and sociopathy. We move on to protagonists who were either victims, suspects or perpetrators of a crime.
Listen, I'm no cop now, I'm a husband. What did you do with her? Where is my wife?
Noir tales are, in short, existentially pessimistic and nihilistic stories led by people whose emotions such as greed, jealousy and lust push them into a downward spiral as their plans go awry. Each step, each action, only trapped the character more and more in a spiderweb he could never escape from. And once the threads gave way, only the bottomless abyss would receive them. And it was this society that Cyberpunk took note of to portray its characters. But it wouldn't be the only thing it would look for to create its own world. Blade Runner is considered one of the most important films in cinema's history due to the enormous influence it had on all of Western culture at the end of the 20th century. How far did it go? Well, backing out to a little while ago, Synthwave is directly inspired by the aesthetic sounds created by authors such as John Carpenter, Tangerine Dream or Vangelis, who influenced the 80s electronic music. Blade Runner was released in 1982. Do you know who the soundtrack's composer is? Vangelis. Remember the images you saw earlier? That's Blade Runner. Blade Runner is not the first cyberpunk work in history. Neither is the original novel which was adapted from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Still, I want to talk about Blade Runner as one of the fathers of the cyberpunk genre, because this movie is the perfect representation of the concept. Buildings that surround a grey sky which daylight is unable to defeat. The dark and unsanitary streets full of battered passers-by shadowed by the flying cars used by those above. Multiculturalism, the last strength of a decadent society that desperately seeks a place to belong in a world that only values the money in your pockets. Asian characters both in neon lights, always on and always lighting up an extreme overpopulation with no room to breathe. And when you raise your head seeking shelter in the sun rays, the impassive gaze of a geisha in a commercial. Dawn belongs only to the skyscraper summit, far from the smog of the city, where only the most privileged can enjoy it. This is the unmistakable dystopian future that shaped Cyberpunk imagined 40 long years ago. Many see Hong Kong directly in this representation of Los Angeles, and they are right. What seemed dystopian a few years ago is now a tangible reality of our mundane lives. We give up our rights and privacy on a daily basis in order to have access to the public services of large corporations. We are the product. It is in this city that Philip K. Dick told the story of Rick Deckard, a conceptual update of the private detective renamed in this world as Blade Runner, a bounty hunter. The oppressive city of Los Angeles was nothing more than a refurbishment of the streets classically detailed in the noir genre. That's the key that separates Blade Runner from Cyberpunk, even though its city is the perfect representation of everything Cyberpunk stands for. Which opens up another question. What does Cyberpunk mean? To find out what a Cyberpunk is, we just have to look at Pilar. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the very definition of a Cyberpunk. A thug from the future. And why this design? Well, this is a punk. The younger ones of you may have no idea what punk culture means. Just know that punk is one of the most important musical trends of the last 50 years, and that it gave rise to many trends. The origin of it was the philosophy punk entailed, but we will talk about that later. While I said Blade Runner was the image Cyberpunk was based on, one of its parents, the man who actually gave birth and shape to Cyberpunk was William Gibson, with the first official Cyberpunk novel in history, Neuromancer. And most of you can't even imagine how incredibly important this work happened to be worldwide. This is Henry Dorset Case, the anti-hero one main lead of Neuromancer. He is a drug-addicted criminal with suicidal tendencies who ends up crippled after his boss catches him stealing. But most importantly, Case is a cyber cowboy. A cyberspace hacker. Yes, you heard that right. Cyberspace. This man, William Gibson, came out with the term cyberspace. Let me tell you this so you actually know what it really means, because many of you, viewers watching this channel, have never experienced what a world without internet is like. The internet, also known as the World Wide Web, and the means through which you are watching my face right now, was officially invented in 1989. Do you know when Neuromancer was published? In 1984. 5 years earlier. This man was already talking about the internet before it even existed. And there are still some people out there who wonder if writing Neuromancer was, in fact, what brought us the internet. This is the reason the virtual world, the Matrix, becomes an unmistakable sign of cyberpunk, to the point of becoming completely inseparable from it. And while it is true the internet's normalization weakens this concept, it does not do the same with its groundbreaking impetus. You know, the word cyberpunk is very precise when defining this genre. Not only does it describe its first protagonist, it also refers to the cultural movement it inspires from, punk. Specifically, its philosophy. We go from cyberthugging to cybertransgress.
Too many teardrops.
At a time when all music was stuck in the same cycles, when the culture was heavily constrained to one standard, a young group of people flipped the table and said, "They don't represent us."
All you need is one guy or girl to stand up and say, "Fuck this." And everyone goes, "Voice of a generation, thank you. I've been thinking that. I never had the guts to stand up and say it." And all of a sudden, "Fuck this" has a backbeat. Say what you mean what you say, put a beat to it. Go.
Take out the dance, motherfucker!
Punk culture is, by definition, a countercultural movement, a way to criticize what is established, what is taken for granted, and change it.
Lou Reed and his crew making this atonal music coming from art and heroin and death in the middle of like feel good, that's punk rock.
Cyberpunk, therefore, also exists to transgress all the cyber. I believe the greatness of cyberpunk lies not in its aesthetics, but in its impetus to reproach the very use of cybernetics. To question the relationship between humanity and technology. To explore the consequences of giving up a part of who we are in pursuit of upgrading our lives. That's the reason why in many works the cyber implants end up driving their users crazy. Because technology is unhuman. In movies like Matrix, cyberspace is not really a place you hack into. Instead, cyberspace is so indistinguishable from reality the entire human race exists in it. We live our lives being unaware we are lambs in a slaughterhouse owned by a technology that has far long surpassed its creator. You won't see neon, but Matrix is cyberpunk. And while debatable, the way Black Mirror explores the current technological and moral limits to show sin so real it's scary, is definitely cyberpunk, and it has nothing of its aesthetic. Well, that was a shit-long intro, but necessary in order to answer the main question. How does Cyberpunk Edgerunners adapt everything Cyberpunk is all about? Honestly, quite well. Okay, so brace yourselves, the spoilers are coming! All the story talk is marked with a spoiler warning at the beginning of each segment, so feel free to skip them if you need to. Let's get to it! Chapter 1 is an absolutely perfect start. You meet David Martinez and you immediately become involved with him when you learn about the school bullying he suffers. A problem that triggers an accident which shatters his normality as well as adding drama, to then finish with the first case of "Welcome to Cyberpunk, bitch!" when we see David pick up the remains of his family from a vending machine. The final push? The asshole bullying him comes personally to insult his mother, while the ashes are still warm. Revenge throws us right into the next chapter and the artifact that will make David's life irreplaceable. Listen, Devstan. That's it? You've taken the bait! You're in! But now comes the problem move, because once you've got your viewer hooked, it takes a good talk to win their heart. And how does Cyberpunk Edgerunners manage to do this? With the art direction. It has it all. The best compliment an adaptation can ever get is to become an extension of the original work. And Cyberpunk Edgerunners is just that. If you've played the video game when you get to this, you're already sold. And if not, just wait a little longer, because while the artistic design of the city belongs to Cyberpunk 2077's original work, Edgerunners does it better. But first, I have to talk about something, because if I don't, I'm going to explode. Okay, it is very rare to find good dubs in animated series. But it is even rarer for the best dub in a series to be in English. It's not like the other dubs don't have merit, but I'm serious, Edgerunner's English dubbing is awesome, to the point of putting the original Japanese one to shame. Like, for example, Maine's voice actor. He's the best of all the versions, giving him a rough, cold and slamming texture to the character.
My name's David.
Who asked? Let's get right down to biz, kid. Slot the shard.
And shoutouts to Rebecca's actress, who, well, is a perfect choice and interpretation.
David, you're fucking adorable. And now here comes the big guys! Be seeing you around then. Bye-bye.
Also, I'm a fan of Giancarlo Esposito's Faraday, totally priceless.
I do not pay you to think. I pay you to check the boxes off my list.
And Matt Mercer's Falco? The images I have of McGree are the perfect relationship I needed for this character.
Thank you kindly.
But, above all, the milestone that sets this dub above the rest is the multiculturalism. We have mentioned it before. Cyberpunk includes social tribes as an inherent part of what makes you unique in a big city, what sets you apart from a world that doesn't give a damn about you, and also one of the points that Punk rebelled against. I need to hear the Latin accents.
You're breaking my heart, mijo.
The African-American accents.
Listen, Choom, this kid got an implant on him that'll fetch at least a couple K.
The Japanese accents.
Do you have any idea who I am?
And not gonna lie, the Japanese are absolutely incapable of making accents.
Good! Delicious!
Just for that reason alone, the English audio is the best one to enjoy this series. That said, being a translator for Netflix has to be the closest thing you can find nowadays to Rowan in galleys. Good lord, the subtitles are trash!
Yesterday. What the fuck?
And I mean, yeah, you don't need them, but I do. Sweet mother of Jesus, how sad is all the subtlety and details of the script getting lost in the words?
David, buddy. Man, you look like shit.
Thanks a lot.
David, buddy. Man, you look like shit.
Thanks a lot.
And I'm pretty sure it's not the translator's fault here, but the very little time they must be given to get the job done. Because that's another one. I did read Edgerunner's Spanish subtitles, and anyone would say what I got is the translation of a translation of a translation, not the script the voice actors work with.
Well, guess we'll see if last time wasn't just beginner's luck.
What do you mean by that?
Nothing personal. We'll find out soon if you're the shit or just another shit stain.
And while we're talking about audio, how about the soundtrack? Well, I'm not a big fan. I mean, I'm not saying the soundtrack is bad, far from it. It's just that my perception of how Cyberpunk has to sound is this. Or this. In fact, Cyberpunk 2077's dark synthwave is very heavy, very far from Asian's electropop Edgerunners seems to be closer to. I don't blame them, though, after all. Studio Trigger is a Japanese studio, and in Japan there's only pop music. Even the indies they have can't stop sounding like pop. Their music industry is all about pop idols, and that's their autochthonous competition league. There's nothing wrong with that. But it kinda shows in Edgerunners. Even so, And much to my regret, since I'm a synthwave lover, I rather see the paradigm shift as an innovation, because the result is unquestionable. They managed to find some terrific international talent, and you won't find a more suitable use of the original songs than the one you find here. I'm not a partaker, I'm not defending it, but the result is unquestionable. It does the most important thing a soundtrack has to do: put you in the mood that fits the scene, harmonize with the visuals, and, if the composer dares so, heighten the feelings at the appropriate moments. I'm not going to prove this to you, but I assure you 100% that if it weren't for this song, this serious romance wouldn't have worked. Rosa Wollstone's I Really Want to Stay at Your House is a freaking hit, and that's it. Because as far as the script goes, we'll save that for later. Let's keep on talking about the video game to series adaptation. Wanna know which is one of the details I liked the most when I started Cyberpunk Edgerunners? This.
Maine. It's Gloria.
The dialogue's inscription while chatting, which not only seems to me the best way to narratively integrate subtitles, it makes me feel what it actually is: a WhatsApp conversation.
Easy as pie. Chill, noob, chill. Real deal's next. Bring it.
And yes, I've seen other films doing the same one way or the other, and I don't really like it. Every frame of painting has a video talking specifically about it, so go check it out if you want. And I guess you've waited long enough. We have to talk about the image. It's what people associate with art direction after all. Remember when I told you that Edgerunners used Cyberpunk 2077 designs better than CD Projekt Red did? Well, yes, indeed, I don't see any Rebecca's T-posing in the middle of the conversation over here. Jokes aside, Studio Trigger has done their homework here, and we can see it in the open shots. The Cyberpunk stands out as a dystopia for being a society that is indifferent to the individual. The government is powerless in the face of corporations, which are only interested in staying ahead of the competition no matter the cost. You're just the means to do so. And so, once David walks the avenues of a night city that doesn't give a dime for him or anyone else, these streets are empty. 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 And lastly, access denied. You don't belong here. That is visual storytelling. Couple it with the terrific David Martinez Let You Down, an automatic recording notifying of foreclosure, and there we go. I'm crying again. Okay, more things I like about the art direction. How do you add enough weight to a sentence to break the narrative, but not enough to pull you out of it?
You fell over the edge, punk.
This text that interrupts the scene is a trick used at some very specific points in the series, and that's why it works. You don't expect it, like the Spanish Inquisition, and it's halfway between two narrative points, so it serves as a transition cut to the next scene. It's one of those details that stuck in my mind. Although maybe this is what you thought when I mentioned transition.
Head to the back!
We won't get too much into it, but a key plot mechanic is the mental disorders some characters suffer from after an excessive use of their cyber implants. Edgerunners depict cyberpsychosis convincingly. I wouldn't say perfectly, because there is no narrative beyond graphic glitches and bombastic eyes that will tell you more about the pathology of psychosis, but at the end of the day, psychosis is a dissonance between our mind and reality, and that's what we see. I'd rather have that and keep it simple than let it get out of hand and turn this into another Evangelion. And I can't live here without talking about animation. Because of course I can't. I'll be frank. I'm not a fan of current Japanese animation. I don't like it. In fact, I almost hate it. The reason is very simple, and I've already talked about it in videos like Porco Rosso. True animation aims to illustrate life. Animation, by pure concept, consists of giving life to a character. It starts from a frame, and almost like a parent, it depends on the animator how the character will end up in the subsequent frames, what its future will be like. Instead, the industry has turned animation into something much more cold and mechanical, its production being simply seen as a money investment. And when you prioritize profit over the actual art behind animation, you dehumanize it. You kill it. You're putting the goal before the means to get there. And that's where the industry goes wrong. This is not good animation. This is not good animation. None of this gives you a consistent idea of how the nature of the characters are when you see it. Is it impressive? Yes. Is it spectacular? Heck yeah! But that's it, that's all! And mind you, I'm not criticizing it for being unrealistic, but for being innocuous. This feels dangerous. This feels like they had a really big budget. This hurts just watching it. This is just a pain to watch. But one thing's for sure, the mastery is always found in the details. So, what about Edgerunners?
Sorry, but who are you? Oh, right, back at the bar.
That's exactly what I'm looking for in animation. Rebecca went from, "Whoa, this guy's an asshole," to, "Hey, he actually remembers." And you haven't heard it, you've seen it. Although where Cyberpunk really excels is in these kinds of scenes.
No thanks, Chum. I know how to fly just fine.
You have to admit, that's fucking awesome. And yet, despite the fierce competition in all the artistic departments, it is the color that takes the cake. This is the nuance that lets everything in Edgerunners take shape. More than that of the festering fumes of the city, more than those you see on the punks, more than that of the tones of chromatic polish, Cyberpunk's most important color is neon light. It is not easy to portray with a brush a physical phenomenon such as neon acquiring the plasma state. Neon lights have such a unique and hypnotic effect that it is difficult not to feel attracted to it. And even though it is true this aesthetic closely mimics Hong Kong's crowded commercial signage, in Cyberpunk this light comes with another context. It is the light of the night, and therefore what lights up our protagonists. Immersion in a story is full only when our eyes see the same our narrators see. What David sees, what Lucy sees, what Maine sees, what Rebecca sees. And therein lies the crux of the matter. Showing the neon lighting so people know it's cyberpunk isn't what's important. It is seeing what's important light up by the neon lights what made this story feel cyberpunk. Trying to express how light and colors affect the characters, the scenes around them, how real the moments and therefore the feelings become, is a waste of time. Because when you add up everything we've talked about so far, the result is something truly unique. With this, I have told you all Cyberpunk Edgerunners lights and peaks, but like any great work, the higher its artistic expression is, the greater the shadow caused by its faults is. It is time to talk about Edgerunner's uglier side. It is time to dive into Night City's hidden filth. It's time to get dirty. It's time to talk about David Martinez. By the way, after so many minutes in this video, I guess you're aware I'm Spanish. David Martinez is the actual name pronunciation, though I'll stick with the David experience to keep the series coherence. David is a kid who doesn't fit at all in his high school and another victim of Night City's viciousness. David's recurring theme, as described to us textually, audibly, and visually, is "Where do I belong to?" David is always carried along by the flow. Things happen. Life tosses him back and forth while he tries to improvise the best he can to keep himself out of trouble. David, at all times, is reactive to all that happens around him, never proactive. What motivation does he have left, after all?
I knew from day one I'd never belong there.
So why stick around for so long? Or at all?
Guess it was for Mom. It was kinda her dream, all that Sokka stuff. Our dream, I guess.
Why should you work to achieve her dream?
Actually, there's nothing wrong with that.
And that's where we know David doesn't really have his own voice. David looks at himself through two mirrors, Lucy and Maine. Lucy is someone who's already chasing a clear dream and the one he wants to be with. Maine, on the other hand, is the one who gave him a place to feel a part of, who taught him how the job works. And above all, Maine was the father he never had. So, even though David might look like he's doing fine, it is when there's nothing going on that his internal battle appears.
David!
Consequently, the first time David takes the initiative is to cross a threshold which will change him as a person. Pulling the trigger will save Lucy, but it will also turn him into everything his mother fought to keep him out of. This is David's dilemma, and this is his choice. This is the first point at which David defines himself. He defines himself as the kind of person who would give everything to save her. Everything just to not let that happen again. Because he may not have a dream, or a place, or a goal. That, as long as he's fine, everything will be fine. This is David's motivation. And this is how they fuck it up!
I was right. It was you. You're David.
The first time I watched Edgerunners and run into this scene, I almost threw my balls at it. This is the turning point towards the maelstrom of nonsense that ends up being David's development until the end of the series. Okay, so putting us into context. The brassed gentleman you have here is the one in charge of Arasaka's high school David was in. They tried to contact him on numerous occasions upon discovering David's incredible compatibility with the Sandevistan. So, this man tells David how Militech, Arasaka's biggest competitor, is shockingly the one behind their contract to get him. Wow, really? Anyone would think David has actually a job! To which David reacts with a Not only that, the director makes him an offer to switch sides and use him as experimental guinea pig, and David is like and meanwhile Lucy's getting a seizure cause she's stabbing into the brain of the guy he's chatting with!
David, the fuck is this?
Yeah, Lucy's alright.
Thanks, Maine. Another one, please? Thank you. All this is so ridiculous you can't even understand it. A dilemma consisting in David abandoning everything and everyone he has fought with just to get back to school? Yes. And you could tell me.
My son at Arasaka Tower, top floor, I can just see it. You've got this, D. You're my son.
You have demonstrated unique potential. Arasaka sees in you a valuable asset.
And I would tell you...
It's not your dream though, is it?
My dream?
You, your mom, you're different people. Why should you work to achieve her dream?
Not to mention 2 chapters back, David crossed a threshold when he ditched the life he had with his mother to officially be an Edgerunner. But not only that, he did it for Lucy, the same Lucy who is having a syncope in the bathtub while David is... Why, you little... It's beyond stupid, this is going full retard!
You went full retard, man. Never go full retard.
And it doesn't stop there. From the second half of Edgerunners, David's recurring theme stops being where do I belong to be what am I fighting for, and from there, how David assimilates other dreams to feel his own. Therefore, and putting together all the pieces we've seen so far, David's main motivation should be to get money and send Lucy to the moon, right? And knowing the clues the series has been giving us about Lucy's past, the final punchline should be something like confronting Arasaka to free Lucy from his chains, right? And then you perfectly close the end when Lucy reaches the moon, symbolizing her gained freedom, right? From chapter 6 onwards, all efforts in Cyberpunk Edgerunners are focused on killing David. But first, let's talk about Maine. Maine is, after the lead duo, the most important character in the series. He's the gum that sticks a bunch of dysfunctional crooks together and makes them work, the one who organizes the jobs and consequently, the group's leader. But most importantly for David, Maine is the father he never had. He is the first person David has a man-to-man talk about sex. Maine taught him to drive, showed him the ins and outs of the job, provided him with a home, and is, ultimately, who David finds as a figure to follow. For better or worse. For us, on the other hand, Maine falls right into the place of the mentor figure. an archetype as old as written history since it comes from the character mentor in the Odyssey. The mentor figure is a character with greater skills and experience than the protagonist and the one who trains him. His main role is to introduce the hero to a new skill and/or instructing how to better use the ones he already has in order to pass him the torch when his task is finished. Not only that, his death can be used to antagonize the villain, create a personal motivation for the protagonist to finish him off, and furthermore, prove that the student has surpassed the master once he defeats the villain.
Why?
This is it. It's the end of the line for me. But not for you. Fast is what you do best, ain't it? Just keep running.
David takes the baton from Maine. Keep running. But to where? Well, first of all, how about freeing Lucy? Throughout the series' first half, the narrative slowly unfolds what the heroine's context is. How she arrived not long before David to the team. How she is actually an even better cyber hacker than the girl who introduced her. Her irrational fear of Arasaka and the reason why her dream is to escape to the moon. Therefore, and following the breadcrumb trail, it is most natural to think Edgerunners Denouement will be about breaking Lucy's chains. Not only that, David's dilemma and his purpose in the world is resolved once he meets Lucy. David's main motivation must be to fulfill Lucy's dream and protect her, as he was unable to protect his mother. What we have instead is... The original version of Cyberpunk 2020 defines cyberpsychosis as what happens when you start adding metal and plastic to people. They start to change, and not into something pretty. In the tabletop game, Cyberpsychosis is the result of implementing cybernetic hardware into an already unstable personality, causing it to fragment and thus giving rise to mental illness. Changes in the personality include an increased empathy towards machines rather than humans, a tendency to ignore people, family, friends, lovers, etc., until finally interaction with humans becomes irritating, leading to a burst of irrational rage that will consume the user completely. In contrast, the cyberpsychosis in Cyberpunk Edgerunners has more general psychopathic traits. It is portrayed as a disconnection from reality caused by an excessive amount of implants in the body, and it is what killed Maine. Maine is a character clearly inspired by the action heroes from the 80s. Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jean-Claude Van Damme gave life to stoic characters who would not be intimidated by anything, who did not shy away from using violence to resolve issues. They didn't call the police when the bad guy on duty got under their noses. They took matters into their own hands. Just like Maine did. Also, Maine is what in Cyberpunk 2020 is known as a bounty hunter. A man who belongs to the street and is worth as much as the reputation that precedes him. As soon as they cease to be trustworthy, their value as bounty hunter goes down the drain. Not only that, the missions are so dangerous only those on the cutting edge survive. Which means implants, lots of implants, and thus cyberpsychosis. Maine's fall from grace is just another of the many stories repeated over and over in Night City. And of course, when faced with the choice of removing implants,
already made it this far. Won't do it. Ain't no way I'm gonna start downgrading. Not now.
His chrome is his pride, his identity, what makes him, him. To remove them is to remove himself and everything he has fought for to get there. If this is how his story is gonna end, so be it. It was one hell of a ride. That's how a cyberpunk dies. This is his choice. But David shouldn't be a victim of his decisions.
David. You can't do it.
Be free. This is what Maine really tells him. This is Maine's legacy. A legacy David will not even take half a chapter to drop. If chapter 6 ends with Maine's death, chapter 7 starts with another David.
You actually have fans now. Probably because you got all swole.
Got iron?
But first, let's recall David's 3 key conflicts so far. First, David has no place to belong to. His home made sense when his mother was there. Now, the nest he grew up is nothing more than a bunch of stakes. Second, David has no purpose to follow. He has nowhere to run to. Third, the only reason David finds to keep going is Lucy. Psychologically, he is dependent on her. Resolving these points is what is known as character development, and it is the mark showing the growth of a person towards a more mature state with more experience. How is the first conflict resolved? It is taken for granted. Chapter 7 begins with David fully acclimated to the job of bounty hunter. Not only that, he has now become the team leader. David starts his work as an Edgerunner first by the bills and being able to it, and then to pay off his debt to Maine, despite being just the opposite of what his mother wanted for him. He eventually gets comfy and makes a place for himself among his teammates, but once Maine disappears, the team disintegrates. His only real link to Edgerunning would be Lucy, but even Lucy has left the team after the last dive. David has no obvious reasons to continue the job, yet not only continues but becomes the team leader. Once he has the money, why go Edgerunner and not Baker? Perhaps out of a sense of duty or responsibility? Maybe out of sheer inertia. We don't really see any resolution on the first conflict on screen, and so the change in David seems inconsequential. The second conflict directly follows the first, and this is how they solve it.
Haven't changed, have you? Still chasing someone else's dream. It's not like I don't understand.
Right. David is chasing Maine's dreams. Wait, what? Maine had a dream?
Fast scratch. She been us. You just gotta slip the keep.
There is no dream! Maine is a tough guy. A bare-bones representation of a stereotypical Cyberpunk 2020 character and heavily inspired by Noir. And by definition, there are no dreams in the Noir genre. There is no justice. There's only madness and a spiraling descent into self-destruction. It's literally Maine's arc. So this?
Haven't changed, have you? Still chasing someone else's dream.
Is bullshit. And it doesn't stop there. David starts having problems with the cyber implants.
Then you best lift your pedal off the metal, Tron. You're about to drive headfirst off the cliff with no way back off.
Yeah? Listen, didn't come here for your gonk jokes. Just take my fucking money and give me my fucking ride!
David!
The Cyberdog's advice makes sense, so why the blunt refusal? Where does that desperation comes from?
Your body, your mind, they have limits, David. You knew that. If normal meds can't cut it, scale back your cyberware.
I can't do that.
Why not?
Because of Maine and my mom. Both had plans for me, left me things to do.
And this one is the most infamous sentence of the whole series. The one that ends up absolutely squandering all the good work we've seen so far. My mother Maine left me things to do. To begin with, David's mother wanted him to have a prosperous life climbing the corporate ladder. Gloria's biggest dream was to get her son out of the danger of the streets, and David is doing exactly the opposite of what she wanted. And what about Maine? What did he leave for him?
Fast is what you do best, ain't it? Just keep running.
His legacy was: run, be free, live your own life. How is living under the shadow of two dead people fulfilling what Maine told him? So either
because of Maine and my mom, both had plans for me, left me things to do.
Is a lie, which would make clear the contradiction in David's motivation for following a path of self-destruction, or else everything that has been told to us during the series' first half has been a lie. Choose your best! Which brings us to what should be the final plot and resolution of the third conflict, Lucy. Everything David does, he does for Lucy. For freeing her. That's exactly how the final chapter of the series ends. With that in mind, why doesn't the final plot focus on Lucy? They had left us with a crumb-tape to build the anticipation of the ending, only to relegate Lucy to a mere damsel in distress waiting for her cybernating tank to come save her. What do we have instead? This.
But why?
Is this what David means by doing the things left by his mother? By killing an innocent woman? By becoming exactly the same as the ones who killed her? The final plot of Cyberpunk Edgerunners focuses on David's fall into cyberpsychosis. Even though the student have to surpass the master, David had to be better than Maine. He had to overcome what Maine could not. That's what receiving the torch is all about. David had to go further than Maine, not repeat his mistakes one by one. I am unable to justify David's final development in Cyberpunk Edgerunners. I can only think of one reason, just one, for this to make the slightest bit of sense, and that is, David had to die. That's it. Unfortunately, the script writers chose the worst possible way to pull this off. The protagonist's death almost seems like the natural outcome within the cyberpunk genre. After all, in noir novels, things never ended fairly for the main characters. Endings weren't clean, much less happy. David dying isn't the problem, its lack of meaning is. The martyr's path, the result of many heroic stories, ends with the protagonist sacrificing himself for a better future, for a greater good. David is not a classic hero, but he is Lucy's hero. Couldn't his sacrifice be the price to pay for Lucy's freedom? Let's find out.
Didn't want to watch you die.
It's the only way I could protect you from this damn city. Just to...
They actually do it, but in a totally improvised way. As far as we're concerned, the whole ending is David Rhodes to self-destruction and then, "Hey Dave, kidnapped Lucy, take this giant exoskeleton and go be the most jacked asshole in all Night City, spoiler goes wrong!" And that's how David's death feels inconsequential. That's why the ending in the moon is so bitter. David is gone, and Lucy has not been freed. It's all been for nothing. This is not the death David Martinez deserved. David deserved to walk his own path, discover his own purpose, fulfill his own dream. He deserved to give it all for a future where Lucy is not haunted by her past. In a world where everyone wants to bleed you, where your value as a person is decided by your pocketbook, where everyone fights to be different, giving your life away to escape the system, to show humanity in a world ruled by chromatic gray, is perhaps the most cyberpunk ending you can have. Because what's cyberpunk? Transgression against the system, the rebellion against our own technology, the inquisition of what is taken for granted. But hey, who am I to say, right? After all, this is just a nobody's thinking.